Commander Zethkar stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Void Serpent, watching the star charts with satisfaction. His natural armor plates shifted slightly as he moved, catching the blue light from the tactical displays. For 30 years, he had served the Calarian Empire, and in those 3 decades he had never tasted defeat. 17 star systems had fallen before his fleets, their inhabitants either destroyed or enslaved according to Calarian law. The bridge hummed with quiet activity as his officers worked at their stations. 12 ships made up his current scouting fleet, each one a masterpiece of Calarian engineering. Their biometallic hulls could repair minor damage automatically, and their plasma batteries could melt through most known materials with ease. Zethkar had chosen this fleet carefully for their mission into unexplored space beyond the Empire's borders. His tactical officer, a young Calarian named Thexmore, approached with a data pad. "Commander, we are detecting artificial signals ahead. 3 vessels, unknown configuration." Thexmore's voice carried the typical confidence of their species. The Calarians had been the dominant military force in their region of the galaxy for over 2 centuries. Zethkar examined the readings with interest. The ships appeared on his main display as simple geometric shapes, far less elegant than Calarian vessels. They seemed to be made of basic metal alloys rather than the living biometal that formed Calarian hulls. Their weapon signatures were primitive, their engines inefficient, and most notably, they showed no signs of the energy shields that protected every civilized vessel. "What species?" Zethkar asked, already planning his approach. Each conquered race had required different tactics, but the principle remained the same: overwhelming force, swift victory, minimal Calarian casualties. "Unknown, Commander. The ship configurations do not match any in our databases. Initial scans suggest the life forms inside are carbon-based, average physical strength, no natural." "Armor plating." Thexmore paused, consulting his instruments. "They appear to be a young spacefaring species. Their technology is perhaps 2 centuries behind our own." Zethkar felt a familiar surge of anticipation. Young species often provided the most interesting challenges, though they rarely lasted long once Calarian fleets arrived. He studied the enemy formation more carefully. 3 ships arranged in a loose triangle, moving at moderate speed toward his fleet. Either they were incredibly brave or incredibly stupid. "Open communication channels," he ordered. It was standard protocol to offer surrender before battle. The Empire preferred to acquire new slaves rather than corpses, though either outcome was acceptable. The main display flickered, and suddenly, Zethkar found himself looking at an alien face. The creature had pale skin, no visible armor, and small eyes that seemed almost fragile compared to Calarian features. Its hair was brown and appeared to serve no protective function. Most disturbing of all, it seemed calm. "This is Captain Jake Morrison of the United Earth ship Liberty," the alien said in a clear voice. The translation systems had no difficulty processing the language. "You have entered United Earth territory. Please identify yourselves and state your intentions." Zethkar almost laughed. This tiny, weak-looking creature was demanding identification from a Calarian battle fleet. The audacity was almost refreshing. Most species either fled immediately or began firing the moment they detected Calarian ships. "I am Commander Zethkar of the Calarian Empire," he replied, allowing his voice to carry the weight of authority that had cowed dozens of species. "You will power down your weapons and prepare to be boarded. Your vessels and crews are now property of the Empire." Captain Morrison's expression did not change. He seemed to consider the demand carefully, as if it were a reasonable request that simply did not suit his current plans. "I'm afraid we can't do that, Commander. You are in violation of United Earth territory. Stand down your weapons and prepare to be escorted out of our space." This time Zethkar did laugh, a sound like grinding stone that echoed through his bridge. His officers joined in, their amusement genuine. The idea that these primitive aliens could escort a Calarian fleet anywhere was absurd beyond measure. "You seem to misunderstand the situation," Zethkar said, gesturing to his tactical display where 12 Calarian vessels surrounded the 3 human ships. Your vessels are outnumbered 4-1. Your technology is inferior. Your species appears to lack even basic defensive capabilities. Yet you speak as if you hold some advantage. Morrison nodded slowly, as if acknowledging these facts. You're right about the numbers, Commander. Our ships are older, our weapons are less advanced, and we don't have your armor or shields. He paused, meeting Zethkar's gaze directly through the communication link. But you're in our territory, threatening our people, and that changes things. Changes things how? Zethkar asked, genuinely curious about the alien's reasoning. It means we'll fight, Morrison said simply. And when humans fight for their homes, for their families, for their species, we don't lose easily. Last chance. Commander, leave our space peacefully. Zethkar studied the human captain with new interest. The creature showed no signs of fear, no indication that it understood the hopeless nature of its situation. Either humans were completely irrational, or there was something about them that his scans had missed. Given their primitive technology, irrationality seemed more likely. Power weapons, he ordered his fleet. Target their engines. We'll disable them for capture. On the display, Captain Morrison sighed and turned to someone off-screen. Amy, signal the Guardian and Defiant. Tell them it's a Code 7 situation. He looked back at Zethkar. Commander, you're about to learn something important about humanity. We might not be the strongest, or the smartest, or the most advanced species in the galaxy, but we're the most stubborn, and sometimes that's enough. The communication ended, leaving Zethkar staring at a blank screen. Code 7. He made a note to interrogate the prisoners about human military terminology once. The battle was over. It would only take a few minutes to disable their ships and begin boarding procedures. His weapon officer reported ready status across the fleet. 12 Calarian vessels armed and prepared to engage 3 primitive human ships. The outcome was inevitable. But Zethkar found himself curious about how these humans would face their defeat. Some species begged, others raged, a few maintained dignity in their final moments. Fire, he ordered. The first plasma bolts lanced across space toward the human vessels, and Zethkar settled back to watch another species learn the price of defying. The Calarian Empire. He had no idea that in the next few minutes he would begin to learn the meaning of fear. The plasma bolt streaked across space, brilliant blue-white streams of energy that should have disabled the human ships within seconds. Zethkar watched the tactical display, expecting to see the familiar pattern of enemy vessels losing power and drifting helplessly as their crews prepared for capture. Instead, something impossible happened. The human ships moved. Not the slow, ponderous maneuvers Zethkar expected from primitive vessels, but sharp, violent acceleration that defied everything he knew about space combat. The Liberty threw itself sideways, with such force that the plasma bolts missed entirely, while the Guardian dove below the plane of battle at speeds that should have crushed its crew. What are their acceleration readings? Zethkar demanded, staring at his display in confusion. 12 Gs, Commander, his sensor officer reported, voice tight with disbelief. No, wait. 15 Gs. The Guardian is pulling 18 Gs in that turn. Zethkar felt his armor plates shift uneasily. 18 Gs would kill a Calarian instantly. Even their enhanced physiology could not withstand such forces. Yet somehow these fragile humans were not only surviving but fighting while enduring, acceleration that should have liquefied their organs. The Defiant completed a maneuver that violated every principle of space combat Zethkar knew. Instead of trying to escape the Calarian formation, it accelerated directly toward them, using a nearby asteroid's gravity to slingshot itself at impossible speeds straight into the center of his fleet. Evasive action, Zethkar ordered, but the human ship was already among his vessels, its primitive weapons firing at point-blank range. The Defiant's guns were crude compared to Calarian plasma batteries, but at this distance they punched through his ship's hulls with devastating effect. Lieutenant Amy Walsh's voice crackled over the human communication channels that his fleet was monitoring. Guardian, this is Liberty. Execute Pattern 7 on my mark. Pete, take your boys in hard. The human ships began moving in perfect coordination, as if controlled by a single mind. They split apart and attacked from 3 different vectors simultaneously, their formation fluid and deadly. Zethkar had seen thousands of space battles, but never anything like this. The humans fought like a pack of predators, each ship supporting the others while maintaining its own deadly purpose. Commander Pete Collins led the Guardian in what should have been a suicide run against the Calarian heavy cruiser, Bone Render. Instead of the expected destruction, Collins somehow managed to match the cruiser's maneuvers despite being in a smaller, supposedly inferior vessel. When the Guardian's main gun failed, Collins did something that made Zethkar's blood run cold. He rammed his ship directly into the Calarian vessel's side. The impact should have destroyed both ships instantly. Instead, the Guardian's hull, designed with some form of reinforcement the Calarians had not detected, punched through the cruiser's biometal plating and lodged itself in the larger vessel's superstructure. Zethkar watched in horror as human Marines began cutting their way out of the Guardian's hull and into the Calarian ship. Boarding parties to the Bone Render, he ordered quickly. Repel the invaders. What happened next would haunt Zethkar for the rest of his life. The humans did not fight like any species he had encountered. When Calarian warriors boarded an enemy vessel, they relied on their superior strength and natural armor to overcome resistance. Combat was straightforward, predictable, following established patterns of dominance and submission that had worked across 17 conquered systems. The humans fought like something from a nightmare. They moved through the corridors of the Bone Render with fluid precision, using weapons that seemed designed specifically for close-quarters combat in spacecraft. When cornered, they did not surrender or retreat. They fought harder. When wounded, they continued fighting until they physically could not move. Commander Pete Collins led his boarding party with a tactical brilliance that confused and terrified the Calarian defenders. He used the ship's own systems against them, venting atmosphere to force the Calarians into predictable positions, then striking from unexpected angles. When his men ran out of ammunition, they used improvised weapons made from ship components. "Sir," came a panicked transmission from the Bone Render's captain. "The humans have reached our reactor core. They're setting explosive charges." Zethkar felt something he had never experienced in 30 years of warfare, a cold sensation in his chest that made his armor plates tremble. "Order them to surrender, offer terms." "I tried, Commander. Their leader said something about holding the line. He won't respond to further communications." The explosion, when it came, destroyed not only the Bone Render but 2 nearby Calarian escorts that were caught in the blast radius. Commander Pete Collins had deliberately detonated his own ship's reactor along with the enemy vessel, ensuring that neither could be salvaged. On the main display, Captain Jake Morrison's face reappeared. His ship was burning, atmosphere venting from multiple hull breaches, but his expression remained calm. "Commander Zethkar, this is your final warning. Leave our space now." "Your ship is dying," Zethkar replied, struggling to understand the human's logic. "Your friend just killed himself rather than face capture. You cannot possibly win this battle." Morrison nodded agreement. "You're right. The Liberty won't survive another 10 minutes. Pete's dead, and so is his crew. The Guardian is gone." He paused, looking directly at Zethkar through the screen. "But we sent a message to Earth. They know you're here now. They know what you are and what you want. What message could possibly matter when you're all about to die?" Captain Morrison's expression changed for the first time since the battle began. Something that might have been a smile crossed his face, but it held no warmth. "We told them how you fight, what your tactics are, how your weapons work. We told them your fleet composition and your technology level." His smile widened. "Most importantly, we told them that you can be beaten. Impossible, you are losing this battle. Commander, you started this fight with 12 ships. How many do you have now?" Zethkar checked his tactical display with growing unease. 7 ships remained operational. 2 others were heavily damaged and limping away from the battle. The humans had indeed lost 2 of their 3 vessels, but they had taken 5 Calarian ships with them, a ratio that should have been impossible given the technological disparity. "You sacrificed your ships for nothing," Zethkar said, but even as he spoke the words he wondered if they were true. "Did we?" Morrison asked. Lieutenant, Walsh, please show the commander what we found in his database. The tactical display changed, showing detailed schematics of Calarian ships, weapons, and defensive systems. Information that should have been classified at the highest levels of Imperial security. While Pete was keeping your people busy on the bone render, we were downloading everything your computers contained about Calarian military capabilities, Morrison explained. Ship designs, weapon specifications, tactical doctrines, fleet positions, all of it is already being transmitted to Earth. Zethkar stared at the display in shock. How did you breach our security systems? Same way we survived 18 G-Force maneuvers, Commander. Humans are very good at doing things that should be impossible when our survival depends on it. The Liberty's main reactor finally gave out, and the human ship began to break apart. Captain Morrison's image flickered as power failed throughout his vessel. Tell Earth, Morrison said in his final transmission. Tell them we held the line. The screen went dark, leaving Zethkar staring at the debris field that had once been 3 human ships. Around him, his bridge crew worked quietly to assess damage and casualties. 5 ships lost, hundreds of Calarian warriors dead, and their most sensitive military data now in enemy hands. For the first time in his career, victory felt like defeat. Commander, his communications officer reported. We're receiving a transmission from the human homeworld. Put it through, Zethkar ordered, though something deep in his chest told him he would not like what he heard. A new human face appeared on the screen. This one wore different clothing and carried himself with obvious authority. Commander Zethkar, this is Admiral Lisa Hayes of the Earth Defense Force. Captain Morrison and his crew died getting us information about your capabilities, information we intend to use. Zethkar straightened, trying to project the confidence that had served him for 3 decades. Admiral, you have lost 3 ships. Your casualties are significant. Surely you realize the futility of continued resistance. Admiral Hayes looked at him with eyes that reminded him uncomfortably of Captain Morrison's calm certainty. Commander, you just learned something important about humanity. We don't surrender our territory, we don't abandon our people, and we don't forget our dead. Captain Morrison bought us something more valuable than ships or lives. He bought us knowledge. What knowledge could be worth such sacrifice? The knowledge that you can bleed, Hayes replied. See you soon, Commander. The transmission ended, leaving Zethkar alone with his thoughts and the growing realization that he might have made a terrible mistake. 2 weeks had passed since the battle with the 3 human ships, and Zethkar's remaining fleet was still making repairs when his long-range sensors began screaming warnings. His sensor officer, a replacement for the one who had died aboard, the bone render, looked up from his console with barely concealed terror. Commander, we have multiple contacts approaching. 47 vessels, unknown class, moving in perfect formation. Zethkar felt his armor plates shift involuntarily. 47 ships. The humans had not just replaced their losses. They had assembled a fleet larger than anything the Calarians had brought to this region of space. He studied the sensor readings with growing unease, noting the precise spacing and coordinated movement. That suggested a level of military organization he had not expected from such a young species. Open communication channels, he ordered, though his voice lacked the confidence that had once intimidated entire star systems. Perhaps these humans could be reasoned with, made to understand the futility of challenging the Calarian Empire. The main display flickered to life, revealing another human face. This one was older than Captain Morrison, with short gray hair and eyes that seemed to look right through Zethkar's natural armor into something deeper and more vulnerable. Commander Zethkar, the human said without preamble. I am Admiral Lisa Hayes, commanding the United Earth Task Force Retribution. You attacked and destroyed 3 Earth vessels in Earth space. You have committed an act of war against humanity. Zethkar straightened, trying to project the authority that had served him for 30 years. Admiral, I am prepared to discuss terms. The death of your people was regrettable, but surely we can reach some accommodation that avoids further bloodshed. Admiral, Hayes studied him with the same unsettling calm that Captain Morrison had displayed. There will be no accommodation, Commander. You will surrender your fleet immediately and submit to judgment under Earth law, or you will be destroyed. Those are your only options. You cannot be serious, Zethkar replied, though something in the Admiral's tone made him doubt his own words. Even with 47 ships, you face the combined might of the Kalarian Empire. Our reinforcements will arrive soon. Our technology is superior to yours. Our warriors are stronger, our armor better, our weapons more advanced. Your warriors are dead, Commander, Hayes said flatly. All of them. Every Kalarian military installation within 50 light-years of Earth space has been destroyed. Your reinforcements aren't coming because there are no reinforcements left to send. The words hit Zethkar like a physical blow. Impossible. You have been here in this system for 2 weeks. How could you possibly have attacked our installations? For the first time, Admiral Hayes smiled, and Zethkar realized with growing horror that it was not a pleasant expression. Commander, did you really think that 3 ships represented the full military might of humanity? Captain Morrison and his people were border patrol, the equivalent of what you might call system guards. While you were congratulating yourself on defeating them, the real Earth fleet was already moving. The tactical display changed, showing star maps with timestamps and battle reports. Kalarian bases throughout the sector marked with red symbols, indicating total destruction. The dates showed that the attacks had begun within hours of Captain Morrison's final transmission. Dr. Kate Sullivan, our xenobiology specialist, spent the last 2 weeks analyzing the data that Captain Morrison's crew downloaded from your ships, Hayes continued. She learned some very interesting things about Kalarian physiology, psychology, and military doctrine. Information we use to develop new weapons and tactics specifically designed to fight your species. Zethkar stared at the reports in growing disbelief. Military installations that had stood for decades reduced to radioactive debris, fleets that had conquered star systems, scattered and destroyed. All of it accomplished in the time it had taken him to repair his damaged ships. Colonel, Ben Parker and his team have been particularly busy, Admiral Hayes said conversationally. Special operations has always been good at infiltration, but your communication networks were surprisingly easy to penetrate once we understood how they worked. We've been listening to your military transmissions, tracking your fleet movements, analyzing your strategic planning. We know where every Kalarian ship in this sector is located, what weapons they carry, and how their commanders think. The realization hit Zethkar like ice water in his veins. The humans had not just defeated his reinforcements, they had turned the very nature of war against the Kalarians. While his people fought individual battles, the humans had been fighting, a campaign that spanned dozens of star systems simultaneously. How? He whispered, though he was not sure he wanted to know the answer. Simple, Commander. You think like conquerors. You see a battle, you fight it, you move on to the next battle. Humans think like survivors. We see a threat to our species, and we eliminate it completely, permanently, and with as much efficiency as possible. Hayes paused, consulting something off-screen. Also, we cheat. Extensively. The human fleet had moved into attack formation while they talked, 47 ships arranging themselves with mathematical precision around Zethkar's 7 remaining vessels. He noted with professional admiration and personal terror that the human formation allowed for overlapping fields of fire, while minimizing the risk of friendly fire incidents. These were not the simple tactics of a primitive species, but the sophisticated strategies of a military force that had clearly studied Kalarian capabilities in exhaustive detail. Admiral, Zethkar tried one last time. Surely there must be some way to avoid this battle. My people are not your enemies. We simply did not understand the strength of humanity when we first encountered your ships. Your people enslaved or destroyed 17 different species, Commander, Hayes replied coldly. The Altarians, the vegan colonies, the Centauri Federation, all of them gone because they had the misfortune to be in your path. Captain Morrison died to make sure that humanity would not be the 18th. Those were legitimate conquests under the laws of war. Whose laws, Commander? Kalarian laws? The survivors of those 17 species might disagree with your definition of legitimacy. Hayes turned to someone off-screen. Lieutenant Carol Brooks, you have permission to begin the attack. Try to leave some of them alive for questioning. New voice responded, young and eager. Yes, Admiral, all squadrons, this is Viper Leader. Remember your training, people. These are the same bastards who killed Captain Morrison and Commander Collins. Make it count. Zethkar watched in fascination and terror as human fighter craft launched from the larger vessels. Hundreds of small, fast ships that moved with the same impossible coordination he had witnessed in the first battle. But these pilots seemed different somehow, more aggressive, more personal in their approach to combat. Admiral, those fighters cannot possibly survive against Calarian point defense systems, he said, though even as he spoke he noticed that the human fighters were approaching an attack pattern specifically designed to exploit gaps in Calarian defensive coverage. Lieutenant Brooks and her squadron have been studying recordings of your previous battle for 2 weeks, Commander. They know exactly how your point defense systems work, where they're mounted and what their limitations are. More importantly, they know how to kill them. The first wave of human fighters struck with surgical precision. Instead of the broad frontal assault that Calarian doctrine would have dictated, the humans attacked specific systems in a carefully planned sequence. Point defense guns, communication arrays, sensor clusters, each target destroyed with weapons that seemed designed for that specific purpose. You studied us, Zethkar said, understanding finally dawning. We studied you, we analyzed you, we adapted our entire military doctrine to fight you specifically, Hayes confirmed. That's what humans do, Commander. We learn from every battle, every mistake, every victory. Captain Morrison's sacrifice taught us how Calarians fight, and we used that knowledge to develop better ways to kill you. The battle was unlike anything in Zethkar's experience. His ships were not just outgunned or outmaneuvered. They were systematically dismantled by an enemy that seemed to anticipate every move he made. When he tried to use his remaining vessel's superior armor to close with the human fleet, human weapons designed specifically to penetrate Calarian biometal opened holes in his hulls that should not have been possible. When he attempted the standard Calarian tactic of focusing fire on a single enemy vessel, the human formation adapted instantly, repositioning to protect the targeted ship while maintaining their own offensive pressure. It was as if he were fighting not just individual ships or even a coordinated fleet, but a single massive organism that could think and react faster than any Calarian commander. How are you doing this? He demanded, as his flagship shuddered under concentrated human fire. No species fights with this level of coordination. Admiral Hayes looked at him with what might have been pity. Commander, humans have been at war with each other for 10,000 years. We fought with stones and clubs, with swords and arrows, with rifles and artillery, with aircraft and tanks and nuclear weapons. We've studied every form of warfare that exists, because for most of our history, the human detention facility was unlike anything Zethkar had expected. Clean, well-lit, with adequate food and medical care for Calarian prisoners. He had anticipated torture, interrogation, the standard treatment that defeated enemies received, throughout the galaxy. Instead, he found himself in a comfortable cell with access to educational materials about human history and military doctrine. It was while reading these materials that Zethkar began to understand the true horror of what his people had encountered. General Rick Stone commanded the human ground forces that had invaded Calarian colony worlds during the past month. The reports that filtered into the detention facility spoke of battles that defied everything Zethkar knew about ground combat. Calarian warriors were naturally stronger than humans. Their armor plating could deflect most small arms fire, and their size advantage should have made them dominant in hand-to-hand combat. Instead, human soldiers had arrived wearing powered armor that amplified their natural abilities beyond Calarian levels. Their weapons fired projectiles designed specifically to penetrate Calarian bioarmor at its weakest points. Most disturbing of all, they fought with a tactical sophistication that turned every Calarian advantage into a liability. The battle report spoke of human soldiers who would retreat from superior forces only to lead them into carefully prepared kill zones. They used Calarian strength against them by forcing close-quarters combat in confined spaces where size became a disadvantage. They studied Calarian psychology and used it to predict where defenders would position themselves, then struck at unexpected locations with devastating effect. Zethkar read about the fall of Calarian Base 7, a fortress that had been considered impregnable. Human engineers had spent 3 days analyzing the base's construction before launching their assault. They had identified structural weaknesses that even the base's designers had not known existed, then used precisely placed explosives to bring down entire sections of the fortress with minimal casualties to their own forces. But it was the reports of human aerial combat that truly chilled him. Lieutenant Carol Brooks and her fighter squadron had achieved something that Calarian military analysts had declared impossible. Flying aircraft that were demonstrably inferior to Calarian fighters, human pilots had achieved complete air superiority over every contested world. They did this not through superior technology, but through tactics that seemed to violate the basic laws of physics and survival. Human pilots pushed their aircraft to structural limits that should have torn the machines apart. They endured G-forces that should have killed them, performed maneuvers that required split-second timing and perfect coordination, and demonstrated a level of situational awareness that seemed almost supernatural. The tactical recordings showed human fighters engaging Calarian aircraft in scenarios where they should have been destroyed within seconds. Instead, they used formation flying, mutual support, and three-dimensional thinking to turn every engagement into a carefully choreographed dance of death that always ended with Calarian wreckage falling from the sky. They fight like they don't care if they die, Zethkar muttered to his cellmate, a former Calarian ship captain named Veltar. No, Veltar replied, looking up from his own reading materials. They fight like they care more about winning than they do about dying. There's a difference. Zethkar studied the human military manuals with growing fascination and terror. These creatures had turned warfare into a science, with detailed analyses of every conceivable combat situation. They had strategies for fighting in vacuum, underwater, in gravity wells, in zero gravity, on worlds with different atmospheric compositions, against enemies with different physiologies. But what truly disturbed him were the historical records. Humans had been fighting each other for their entire recorded history. Not occasional conflicts over resources or territory, but constant, unending warfare that had shaped their entire evolutionary development. They had developed thousands of different fighting styles, hundreds of military philosophies and tactical doctrines for every conceivable type of conflict. The records showed wars of such scale and brutality that they dwarfed anything in Calarian history. Humans had fought battles involving millions of soldiers, conflicts that had lasted for decades, campaigns that had consumed entire continents. They had developed weapons capable of destroying their own planet and had come within moments of using them on multiple occasions. Most terrifying of all, they had survived every one of these conflicts and emerged stronger. Look at this, Veltar said, pointing to a passage in one of the military histories. They fought something called the Second World War. 60 million casualties. 60 million, Zethkar. That's more than the entire population of the Calarian homeworld. Zethkar read the passage with growing horror. The humans had divided into factions and fought a global conflict that had lasted 6 years. They had developed new technology specifically for killing each other, created strategies for total warfare that targeted not just military forces, but entire civilizations, and had demonstrated a capacity for organized violence that seemed almost unlimited. And then, when the war was over, they had rebuilt their world and prepared for the next conflict. They don't just fight wars, Zethkar realized. They evolve through warfare. Every conflict makes them better at the next one. The realization explained everything he had witnessed: the impossible coordination, the tactical brilliance, the willingness to sacrifice individual units for strategic advantage. Humans had spent millennia learning how to fight, and they had been taught by the most demanding instructor possible: survival itself. A human guard approached their cell, a young soldier who treated the Calarian prisoners with professional courtesy, but obvious wariness. "Commander Zethkar, you have a visitor." Zethkar was escorted to a meeting room where Admiral Lisa Hayes waited with a collection of documents and what appeared to be a portable computer terminal. "Commander, I thought you might be interested in seeing what we've learned about the Calarian Empire since your capture," she said without preamble. The terminal displayed a three-dimensional map of Calarian space, but most of the systems were now marked with blue symbols indicating human control. In the past month, while Zethkar had been reading about human military history, that history had been playing out across dozens of star systems. "Impossible," he whispered. "The Empire has defended those worlds for centuries. Our fleets, our fortifications, our allies. Gone," Hayes said simply. "All of it. The Calarian Empire no longer exists as a military force. Your remaining ships have either surrendered or been destroyed. Your colonies are under human administration. Your homeworld is blockaded and awaiting terms of surrender." Zethkar stared at the display, trying to process what he was seeing. The Calarian Empire, which had dominated this region of space for over 2 centuries, had been dismantled in less than a month. "How did you move so fast? Our intelligence services, our early warning systems, our defensive networks." Colonel Ben Parker's teams had infiltrated all of them weeks ago, Hayes explained. "We've been inside your communication networks, your command structure, your strategic planning systems since the day Captain Morrison died. Every order your high command issued, every troop movement they authorized, every defensive position they established, we knew about it before your own forces did." The scale of the human intelligence operation was staggering. They had not just defeated the Calarian military, they had turned the Empire's own systems against it. Every strength had been catalogued and countered, every weakness had been exploited. Every strategic asset had been either captured or destroyed. "But why?" Zethkar asked. "You could have simply defended your territory. Why destroy the entire Empire?" Admiral Hayes looked at him with the same cold expression she had worn during their first communication. "Because, Commander, you made the mistake of threatening humanity's existence. When humans face that kind of threat, we don't just fight to win the current battle. We fight to make sure the threat can never arise again." She activated another display showing detailed analyses of Calarian biology, psychology, and social structures. "Dr. Kate Sullivan and her team have spent the past month studying your species in exhaustive detail. We now know more about Calarians than you know about yourselves. We understand your motivations, your capabilities, your limitations, and your potential for future aggression. And what have you concluded? That your species is inherently expansionist and will always pose a threat to human survival, as long as you retain the capacity for interstellar warfare," Hayes replied. "So we have removed that capacity permanently." The final display showed the terms of Calarian surrender: complete disarmament, dissolution of the imperial government, human oversight of all Calarian colonies, and mandatory education programs designed to teach Calarian children about the consequences of aggressive warfare. "You're going to destroy our entire civilization," Zethkar said quietly. "No, Commander, we're going to save it. Your civilization was built on conquest and slavery. That civilization deserved to be destroyed. But your species, your people, your children, they deserve a chance to build something better." Hayes stood to leave, then paused at the door. 6 months after his capture, Zethkar stood before the Human Integration Council in what had once been the Calarian Imperial Palace. The Great Hall where emperors had once planned the conquest of star systems now hosted diplomatic meetings between human administrators and Calarian civilian leaders. The irony was not lost on him. President Helen Martinez represented the United Earth government, a small woman with graying hair who seemed unremarkable until she spoke. Her voice carried the same quiet authority that Zethkar had learned to associate with truly dangerous humans. Beside her sat Vice Admiral Tony Reed, the human officer who had commanded the final assault on the Calarian homeworld. "Commander Zethkar," President Martinez began, consulting the documents before her, "you've been selected to serve as a liaison between your people and the Human Integration Authority. Your military experience makes you uniquely qualified to help other Calarians understand what happened to your empire and why." Zethkar studied the human president with the same fascination he had developed for all members of this remarkable species. "What would you have me tell them, Madam President?" "The truth," she replied simply. "That the Calarian Empire fell not because humans were stronger or more advanced, but because we were more committed to survival." Over the past 6 months, Sethkar had watched human administrators work with Kalarian civilians to rebuild their society from the ground up. The humans had not enslaved the Kalarian population as he had expected. Instead, they had begun a careful process of cultural reconstruction designed to eliminate the expansionist mindset that had driven the empire, while preserving what was valuable in Kalarian civilization. Kalarian children now attended schools, where they learned about the 17 species their empire had destroyed. They studied human history alongside their own, learning about civilizations that had chosen cooperation over conquest and had prospered as a result. Most importantly, they learned about the consequences of aggressive warfare through the lens of their own recent defeat. The integration process has been remarkably successful, Vice Admiral Reed reported. Kalarian civilians have adapted well to human administration. There have been no significant resistance movements, no attempts at sabotage or rebellion. Your people seem almost relieved to be free of the imperial system. Sethkar nodded, understanding the truth of that observation. The Kalarian Empire had been built on constant expansion and the glorification of military conquest. It had been an exhausting way to live, always preparing for the next war, always seeking new worlds to conquer. The peace that humans had brought, even the peace of defeat, offered something that most Kalarians had never experienced: security. "There is something I must ask," Sethkar said carefully. "During our final battle, Admiral Hayes could have destroyed my fleet completely. She chose not to. Throughout this occupation, humans have shown restraint that I do not understand. Why?" President Martinez exchanged glances with Admiral Reed before answering. "Because, Commander, the ultimate goal of human warfare is not destruction, but survival. Once we determined that the Kalarian Empire no longer posed a threat to humanity, continued violence became counterproductive. This concept had troubled Sethkar throughout his captivity. Humans fought with a savage efficiency that terrified him, but they also demonstrated a capacity for mercy that was even more frightening. They had the power to exterminate the Kalarian species entirely, yet they had chosen instead to preserve and rebuild Kalarian civilization according to human principles. In human military doctrine, Admiral Reed explained, there's a concept called proportional response. We use only as much force as necessary to achieve our objectives. Total destruction is reserved for threats that cannot be neutralized any other way. But how do you restrain such power? Sethkar asked. Your species has weapons that could sterilize planets, yet you choose not to use them. Your soldiers could have executed every Kalarian military officer. Yet here I stand alive and unharmed. This restraint seems almost impossible for a species as militaristic as humanity. President Martinez smiled, and for the first time since meeting her, Sethkar saw genuine warmth in her expression. Commander, I think you misunderstand something fundamental about humanity. We are not a militaristic species. We are a survival-oriented species that has become very good at warfare because the alternative was extinction. She activated a holographic display showing Earth's history, beginning with the earliest human civilizations. For every war in human history, there have been 1,000 instances of cooperation, trade, cultural exchange, and peaceful coexistence. We fight when we must, but we prefer to build. The display showed human cities, art, literature, scientific achievements, and social progress spanning millennia. Sethkar realized that he had been seeing only one aspect of humanity, the part that emerged when they were threatened. There was another side to the species, one that created instead of destroyed, that built instead of conquered. The reason we can restrain our capacity for violence, Admiral Reed added, is because we understand its true cost. Every human who dies in war represents lost potential, ideas that will never be born, children who will never laugh, discoveries that will never be made. We fight to preserve those possibilities, not to eliminate them. Sethkar thought of Captain Jake Morrison and Commander Pete Collins, the human officers who had died in the first battle. He had seen their deaths as acceptable, casualties in a minor skirmish. Now he understood that each of those deaths had represented the loss of irreplaceable human potential. sacrifice made meaningful only by the survival of their species and the protection of their people. There's something else you should know. Commander, President Martinez said, her tone becoming more serious. The integration of Calarian space is not just about preventing future aggression. It's about preparing for something larger. The holographic display changed, showing star charts that extended far beyond Calarian or human territory. Red symbols marked the locations of other aggressive civilizations, species that had followed the same expansionist path as the Calarian Empire. The Vorthon hegemony, the Skal Dominion, the Nexus Collective, Admiral Reed listed them one by one. All of them follow the same pattern of conquest and enslavement that characterized your empire. All of them pose potential threats to human survival. And you intend to fight them all? Zethkar asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. If necessary, President Martinez replied. But we'd prefer to find another way. That's where you and your people come in. The display showed a new configuration, with human and Calarian systems working together in a defensive alliance. Other species that had been conquered or threatened by the aggressive empires were included in the formation. We're offering your people a choice, Commander, she explained. You can remain under human administration, safe but restricted, or you can join us as equals in building something new. A defensive alliance based on cooperation rather than conquest, dedicated to protecting member species from external threats while allowing them to develop according to their own values and traditions. Zethkar stared at the display, trying to process the implications of what he was seeing. Humans were not just offering Calarian survival, they were offering them partnership in a new type of civilization. Why would you trust us with such responsibility? He asked. My people are your former enemies. Because, Admiral Reed replied, former enemies often make the most reliable allies. You understand the cost of warfare better than anyone. You've seen what happens when a civilization becomes addicted to conquest. That experience makes you valuable in helping other species avoid the same mistakes. President Martinez stood, signaling that the meeting was coming to an end. Commander, you asked me once about the true nature of human fear. You wanted to know what terrifies a species that has made friends with death itself. Zethkar nodded, remembering his desperate attempts to understand human psychology during the final battle. Our greatest fear is not death, Commander. Our greatest fear is meaningless death, the waste of potential, the loss of everything we've built and everything we might become. That's why we fight so hard to survive, and that's why we're willing to share our survival with former enemies, who prove they can change. As he walked back to his quarters through corridors that had once echoed with the march of Imperial troops, Zethkar reflected on everything he had learned about humanity. They were indeed the most terrifying species in the galaxy, but not for the reasons he had originally thought. Humans were terrifying because they had weaponized hope itself. They fought not just to destroy their enemies, but to create a future where such fights would no longer be necessary. They had turned their greatest weakness, their mortality, into their greatest strength by making every life and every death meaningful in service to the survival of their species and their ideals. In his final log entry as a commander of the Calarian Empire, Zethkar wrote, I have learned the true nature of fear. It is not the fear of death which comes to all living things. It is not the fear of pain which can be endured,